Possessor? I hardly even know her. Just kidding. We like to have fun here at America's most clandestine podcast, The Pod People. I'm Matisse Van Rossum. Or am I a CIA operative wearing his skin like a suit? I'll never tell.
I'm the man with two brains, Ben Sheets, and, it's called Possessor, but shouldn't it be called Possess Him?
Hi, I'm Cleveland Mosier, and I think it's time for a face-off.
Ooh. Much like Ben, around here we all like to get brain 2 times.
Speak for yourself, but all right.
We're back from Zombie Island this week, talking about a very, very different film. We're talking about the brand new 2020 film Possessor, written and directed by Brandon Cronenberg, the son of the legendary body horror master David Cronenberg. And the film stars Andrea Riseborough, Christopher Abbott, Jennifer Jason Leigh, and Sean Bean.
And many more.
And many more, yes. And it is a deep, dark dive into a story of a secret agency that commits assassinations by possessing the bodies of random folks and making them seem like spree killings.
And deep and dark it is.
Deep and dark. Well, Ben, this was your pick, so why don't you give us a little bit of an introduction into Possessor?
Sure. So the reason I picked this is it's been getting a ton of buzz, first off, and it's a movie I've been keeping my eye closely on since the end of the year, actually, of last year. I thought it was going to be an end-of-the-year pick, but it didn't actually end up coming out until this year. Directed by Brandon Cronenberg, son of David Cronenberg, auteur, you could say. Yeah, this movie is a really interesting mix of body horror and thriller, psychological thriller, I guess you could say. It's very visceral, very stylistic.
Yes. Extremely violent.
Yes.
Very gory, very brutal.
We're just riddled with tension. Yeah, the whole movie, just edge of your seat.
And
If
lots
I had to condense the feeling of this movie into an onomatopoeia, it's just yee the whole time, just whoa.
And lots of full penetration. Be that the penetration of a knife into somebody's neck.
Or the other.
Or a needle into somebody's head.
Or the other.
Or a penis into,
know. Yeah.
Well, it's funny because we watched the uncut version.
There were some uncut things in here, all right.
And cut. And lots of cut things as well.
Well, yeah, we were making the joke beforehand, comparing it to the It's Always Sunny bit.
Yeah, Dolph Lundgren.
You said it at a really crucial moment during the movie, I think.
Where Dolph Lundgren has the power to smell crime.
Guys, we're going to show full penetration, and we're going to show a lot of it. I mean, we're talking, graphic scenes of Dolph Lundgren really going to town on this hot young lab tech. And then he smells crime again. He's out busting heads. Then he's back to the lab for some more full penetration. He smells crime, back to the lab, full penetration, crime, full penetration, crime, penetration. And this goes on and back and forth for 90 or so minutes until the movie just sort of ends.
But it really does sum up this movie beautifully, I think. Crime, penetration, crime, penetration.
In this case...
Sometimes both at once.
In this case, it's not necessarily fighting crime, it's committing crime, then back to the lab for full penetration, and so on and so forth. This film fucking ruled, frankly.
Yeah.
I went in with very high expectations. I did not know about this film's existence until about a month ago, a little more maybe, but I have been hearing all the buzz as well, and I'm glad you picked this one for us, because I definitely wanted to watch this. I went into this thinking that it was Brandon Cronenberg's first film. It's not. He did that thing Antiviral back in 2012, and he's done a few other smaller productions since then.
None of us have seen Antiviral.
No.
Right? Okay.
No,
yeah.
correct. This was my first Brandon Cronenberg.
Same.
But man, what a...
Not my last.
No, I'm going to definitely keep an eye on this dude. The fingerprints of his father are all over this, too, thematically.
The apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
Yeah, thematically, it's it's very similar to David Cronenberg's stuff. There's a lot of like weird psychosexual stuff, just like extreme brutality, sort of warping of the human form, the body horror, the kind of dystopian science fiction kind of thing. Like I was getting Videodrome, Dead Ringers, just like all kinds of vibes from this movie in all of the best ways that felt like fresh, but still like homage to his dad or just like passing the torch. I don't know.
Well, even down to production design, it definitely rings very true to the Cronenberg pedigree, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
Like the device she uses to hook into someone is very David Cronenberg in its look. It's very Geiger-esque, I guess you could say.
But believably so, which is something I liked about it. It conjured, like, in its silhouette, like the feeling of a Geiger-like object, but it felt almost believable in this world. It felt like medical equipment.
Which is very Cronenberg. You know, Dead Ringers and all its medical tools is very similar.
Yep.
And so it doesn't feel like high fantasy. It feels like something you could plug into, and I appreciated that about it. And that's almost any aspect of this film. Like it's a film you can reach out and touch, or will reach out and touch you. For that, the immersion is really rich.
What I was kind of surprised about in this movie that I grew to really appreciate, or I mean, I guess I liked it from the get-go, but like science fiction typically has kind of like a pristine, sterile quality to it. Lots of white, chrome, you know, clean, bright metal and stuff like that. And this movie is very, like, the science fiction stuff is like very dark. It's more muted and dirtier in a lot of ways. Like they're implanting the devices in the back of their victim's head in like a dirty ambulance that is just parked on the street.
Yeah.
The calibration device that we see multiple times is just like a needle that you have to like insert into your skull.
Yeah, it looks like a fucking meat thermometer.
Yeah. Or like an AUX, like an aux cable, like just with a needle on the end of it.
With like and the device itself is like a little black plastic thing wrapped in like leather with like a stereo knob on it. It's interesting in kind of like a timeless way. Like it feels like it could be in the future or right now or even in the near past, you know,
or the future past,
or the future past or whatever. Yeah, the design of the shit in this movie is very fucking cool.
Oh yeah. If I had to draw any association, my biggest pick by miles is the original Ghost in the Shell. There are some sequences that are just homages to it. When the assassin is first being like plugged into the target, that whole sequence is right out of Ghost in the Shell. Like the reforming of her body, I can't see it as anything other than an homage to the opening of the original Ghost in the Shell with the animation where the Major is being rebuilt. It's just so similar with the skin being poured on, but here it's used as such a beautiful metaphor, and it's so effective in the hollow body just sort of forming out of liquid nothing. Really cool, like just gorgeous shot.
Yeah, incredible effect.
And done practically as well, with probably a little bit of computer enhancement, but very obviously practical effects.
And Ghost in the Shell does the same thing with like that sense of a heterotopia as well, where the time isn't that far in the distant future. It's near enough to still be believable, and there's a lot of grit and dirt in those movies. And the tech as well is portrayed the same way. Like if you look at I can't remember his name, but the other detective who's has the eye replacement, like it has that same like medical tech, like hard shell casing believability to it. It's not all just lasers and shit, and it's not all like pristine and shiny all the time. And it just makes so much more of an immersive world to walk into. And God, I if Brandon Cronenberg had directed the live action, I can only imagine how cool that could have actually been. What a shame. But enough about that.
Yeah, you're really just talking to yourself. I
know, but it really is comparative. And Ben, you can agree with that, right?
Yeah,
and not just in the effects, but also in the plot.
I would say in terms of effects and the dirtiness of technology, I saw parallels with David Cronenberg stuff. Stuff like Existenz, where
I forgot about
It's
Existenz.
very much, dirty technology, but, it makes the world feel so much more tactile and real. And while I do see the Ghost in the Shell connection, I do think, the dirtiness is more Cronenberg than anything else.
Well, it's definitely that. There's no doubt there.
The thing I love about the dirtiness, though, is a lesser director would have taken that and just made a gray looking film. This movie's incredibly colorful. It's one of the most colorful movies I've seen this year. It just, every shot is so vibrant. They use bright primary colors wherever possible.
All with intent, too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's often like on a background of muted colors. So you'll have like a character in like a stark blue shirt, on a more muted background. So the color is very isolated.
In the opening sequence, all had these bright blue outfits,
like tracksuits. I thought they were like a Heaven's Gate style cult at the beginning, because they're all like matching blue tracksuits, but they're like waitresses at some like upscale fancy party. Or like when we see inside the evil corporation, whose name I've forgotten, Zuthipu or something like that.
It's essentially Abstergo from Assassin's Creed. Like, yeah.
Well, no, I mean the one that they infiltrate.
Oh, yes, that one. Yeah, sorry.
Yes, Abstergo. That secret government agency is never named. While we're on that note, especially in science fiction, the word dystopian gets thrown around a lot, but I think that this is an extremely dystopian film in that it plays in so much to like all these modern fears, like government agencies watching you, body snatchers, greedy corporations where you're like forced to do depressing and demeaning work. You can't work your way to the top while the billionaire lives in exaggerated opulence,
right,
while taking pleasure in the misery of the people below them. All of this stuff is, especially in 2020 in America, in the ongoing pandemic, where we are seeing the billionaire class getting richer while more and more people slip into poverty and unemployment. It's like, this movie's very depressing. I was depressed for this entire movie.
What's so lovely about the setting that you described too is that often science fiction like overplays that hand.
Yes.
And it gets caught up in just the world building, which can be great, but it gets caught up in treating it as original.
Yeah.
Whereas this one is like, okay, we've all seen this song and dance before. This is the background. Let's focus on the characters.
Well, I think
it's largely character driven in that cool world.
Even
and
more
I
so,
it's
because
that.
it's such a real dystopia.
Yeah.
Like Facebook already has people looking at wretched, horrible things all day, every day, in the tens and hundreds of thousands, of people just doing this content moderation
doom
job.
scrolling.
Yeah,
I think is the term.
Doom
yeah.
scrolling.
And so to see something like that in this setting where they're just content IDing stuff, it's very real.
By illegally accessing the webcams in people's like home assistant devices, to as we see the protagonist in the body of the other guy, to like figure out what kind of curtains people have in their houses so they know how to better advertise to them. The company is a data mining corporation. And even so, it's like that's distilled even more by like they don't even have offices or cubicles. They're all just in like a bunker wearing VR goggles of an office, of like a corner office. Yeah. So it gives the illusion of them being in an office with like a lovely view, and they've got like the computer in front of them, but they're just like crammed like sardines into this basement, just like invading people's privacy to sell data to advertisers.
Yes, is great, because I want to go back to this, and I know like Tease, you haven't seen it before, but I really do think that there are some more strong comparisons to draw. Keeley being that both of these films center around the concept of like the loss of identity, that being Ghost in the Shell and this. And Ghost in the Shell, the primary focus is on the loss of the identity via technology, right? Like once your brain can be copied, like what is left of you? If your body can be rebuilt, what is the ghost? What is the soul? And this film tackles those same concepts in a very similar way, but via just removing the technological aspect beyond it being utilized as a tool. Yeah. Right? Like in Ghost in the Shell, it's about implanting your consciousness into a robot. This is about implanting your consciousness into another person.
Where their consciousness still exists, which becomes a major crux of like the third act of the film, when we see both consciousnesses struggling to maintain control of the same body.
And gain control.
And gain control.
There's such a cat and mouse of sorts in there.
And something that I love about both of these films is that they both utilize the setting to further play out that theme. Ghost in the Shell is set in Hong Kong, which is a location that has had its identity forcibly changed multiple times. And this film is set, I don't believe it actually ever says directly.
I'm pretty sure it's Toronto.
Toronto. Yeah. It's set in Canada, which also has many identities, right? It's French, Canadian. There are characters with British accents. There are characters with American accents. The culture has melded. I love that use of theme and that carryover there. So you can see like why I keep coming back to like Ghost in the Shell. I mean, also it's because it's one of my favorite movies. And I think it about stops there, but that use of identity, plays a huge role.
I want to go back to the content farming a little bit. I think one of the things that's so revealing about that sequence and how it plays out is, she takes the body of a boyfriend of
boyfriend of the company's heiress.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we later on meet the company owner essentially, who's played by Sean Bean. And it's revealed that Sean Bean put him into this position of content farming. Yeah. Out of a sort of cruelty, because it's very clear that Sean Bean realizes how awful and psychologically damaging
he takes pleasure
a role
from
like
it.
this is. And I think the fact that we see that he knows that and it's kind of a sadistic thing that he's doing really illuminates how awful the practice really is. Yeah. And it kind of shows, in a lot of these situations, even in real life, these people know how awful it is.
Of course.
And they
get off on it.
Yeah.
And like he and his daughter resent each other. So when she has a boyfriend, Sean Bean wants to essentially try to drive that boyfriend away because he wants to deprive his daughter of happiness. So how does he do that? Oh, come work at my company in the most demeaning and depressing position that I can put you in, which in this case is a content farm. To just like sort of see how ambiently like people like that will just play with the lives of others. I mean, this movie, and we'll get in, I have more thoughts on this later as well, but this movie is called Possessor, and that term has a lot of different meanings in the context of this film. Like, of course, in a literal sense, it's, our secret agent Voss possessing the body of Colin so, she can assassinate the daughter and Sean Bean and whatever. But also, like, there is a constant struggle about possession in general. Like, who is possessing whom? Like, Sean Bean has this sense of possession over his daughter, and he wants to have that control. And then we have Jennifer Jason Leigh's character, who's like Voss's handler, who is herself extremely possessive of Voss. She's like actively trying to separate her from her family because she's her best agent, and she wants to pass the torch along to her. Everything in this movie is just like a massive web of who is possessing whom in as many different ways as possible.
Yeah, the theme is well played out.
I love how you mentioned Jennifer Jason Leigh's character, kind of possessing our main character. Yeah. Because she does mention that our main character was separated from her family, but is trying to get back into their lives more actively. And you see a scene even early on in the movie where she goes back and she has to kind of train herself how to communicate with them, because it's clear that continued use of, taking other people's body takes a toll on her, essentially.
Well, yeah, assuming their identities and having to become them for days at a time in order to not blow her cover and to be convincing. It's the ultimate method acting deal, to the extent that, and she's so good at it, that she loses her own sense of self. She's unable to identify what is her and what are the pieces of the people that she has become. So yeah, when she's trying to interact with her family, we see her standing outside practicing things to say to them in different inflections and voices and stuff like that to try to seem normal.
Mm-hmm.
And we see that, like, once she takes control of Colin, like, the extent that this career has damaged her because of how easily she starts to dissociate from herself and get lost in him. So,
which is part of the reason why Colin's consciousness can come back and start controlling his body. Yeah,
exactly.
Which I think is just a brilliant connection there. And it's the same reason the waitress didn't shoot herself, She ended up shooting the cops because she didn't want to end herself. It was the other consciousness coming through and taking
self-preservation, unable to harm itself.
Yeah, just brilliantly done.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and often with a degree of subtlety that it isn't seen often enough, frankly, and it's always appreciated. One little fact I think is kind of fun is one of our characters in the film who isn't as directly involved in the body swapping is the actress Tuppence Middleton. Not a real name. Is a real name. Doesn't sound like a real name. But it's Tuppence Middleton, who I love from the show Sense8, which is also about body swapping.
How about that?
So I think that's sort of fun. Her character as the fiance is great, or as Sean Bean's daughter. She does a great job as a supporting role. I think it's a little late for us to say, but we all really enjoyed this movie. And for me, I didn't know anything going into it, and being able to put the pieces together organically in the setting was really gratifying. Maybe we could tack that to the front of this, because the less I think the better.
Yeah, I knew the basic premise, but that was about it.
Yeah.
The basic premise, and that it was Brandon Cronenberg. So I feel like I had an idea going in, like, what I could expect tonally. But yeah, in terms of, like, the way the story unfolds, it's twisty and turny. Feels like it's an oversimplification. Like, it doesn't really do it justice. But
nebulous, organic.
Nebulous, yeah. To use the most hated word, cerebral.
I mean, it is. This movie is literally cerebral. Yes. Like, it's about brains. Yes. So I think we're allowed to use that term.
Yeah,
and not sound too pretentious, because it's like it's about brains, y'all.
That's become like the generic term to describe like all of Christopher Nolan's movies.
I know.
And as much as I have fun with a lot of his stuff, like, this is a way smarter, like, more literally cerebral film than anything that he's ever made.
This movie isn't just smart for dumb guys. I like to think.
Yeah. This is Inception for smart people.
What I appreciate about it, though, and we won't get into the end yet because there's a lot of other stuff to unpack, is that though I felt like I didn't understand what was happening a lot of the time by design, by the end, it tied itself off pretty well. Like, I felt like by the time the credits rolled, like, I was, like, well in control of, like, the pieces of the narrative. Like, I knew what had happened in the movie, even though if for a lot of the film I didn't know what was happening,
Well, one aspect that I think can separate this film from a Christopher Nolan is that it's not afraid to show abstraction when it could be interpreted literally.
Yes.
There's a great deal of, like, metaphoric imagery that at the time you can't necessarily tell is actually whether it's actually happening or not. There's no like filters that come over the screen that make it like abundantly clear all the time, because we're supposed to be sort of experiencing this from the protagonist's shoes, and the whole idea is sort of reality breaking down as you meld in with someone else. So the abstraction sort of becoming part of what we're seeing in front of us is
it's more
reality breaks down.
Yeah, it's more psychedelic because it's like really delving into the nature of consciousness and subconsciousness. So like you can get away with these kind of vague, ambiguous, abstract sequences. It's definitely not the South Park joke about Inception where thoughts of my dead wife manifest themselves as trains. You know? Where it's like, in that it's like, ooh, what does that mean? But in reality, it's like, it's not that deep, fam. You know, like it's still very literally, it's like, oh, we're going into dreams. So man, the staircase, the paradox staircase is there, you know, or like, ooh, the hallway is spinning because it's a dream and anything can happen. You know, it feels like a bad acid trip.
What I will say about the movie's plot is I think this film is about as deep as Inception. Like it's really not that heady. Like, well, conceptually,
no.
Like, which isn't the point. What I think separates this film and makes it feel deeper is the execution of it. Like, how it plays out the themes, how it uses like the possessor metaphors, like we discussed earlier, and we'll almost certainly discuss more. And the application of this movie is where like the mastery comes into play.
Well, exactly.
Because if we break down the plot line, this organization is hijacking people's bodies so that they can assassinate them in a way that seems believable or real. There is so much room for error in that like Rube Goldberg assassination style plot, where it would just be way easier to just like have a random person infiltrate the party. Like it would be way easier, way more affordable and more manageable to just have a hitman kill them. There's really no reason to go through all of these extra steps.
It's for the believability, you know? It's about like it's the same kind of like evil corporate shit, like hacking somebody's self-driving car to drive off the road. And it's like, oh, it was an accident. In this case, they're having to jump through a lot of hoops, but like
they're fun hoops.
The central plot of this movie is they're hijacking the body of the boyfriend of the heiress, who is like, he has a past history with drugs. He's on the outs with the father. So the idea is that it becomes a murder-suicide, and they're hired by her brother, who is next in line for succession. And we never see him. So it's like, if there was just a hitman hired to kill them, and then the brother steps in to assume the ownership of the company, that's suspicious. He immediately falls under suspicion of having hired somebody to kill them. By making it look like a murder-suicide accident, it removes suspicion from him, and we see that the agency has an ulterior motive because they also have blackmail over the son, which they explicitly say what corporate really wants is to be able to take control of the company because we have the dirt on him, we own him, so we own the company.
Yeah, well,
which feels realistic.
So yeah, the motive is there. There's no question about that. Like, and just like purely from like a realism point, I think it's very Rube Goldberg-esque and kind of silly. But like you can absolutely break it down. This film does, and it does it all with intent, and that's the joy and beauty of science fiction. And I wouldn't have, just to be clear, I wouldn't have anything changed. It's like my favorite thing to do is take like something that's so odd and try and make it work. I'm all here for it, and I love it. And I love it for that.
I mean, I would say that like it feels realistic in the sense where like, I don't want to delve too deep into this on the show because it's not the place for it. But if we want to like put on our little tinfoil hats, you know, and look at shit like the assassination of JFK and like 9/11 and like Epstein, and it's like these are seemingly overly elaborate schemes to accomplish a sinister goal, but it works.
Yeah, and
you know, and I think that in this film's case,
sure,
it makes sense.
Oh, absolutely.
One thing I wasn't 100% sure of when watching is the company that they're working for, is that a government or is that a corporate entity? Because I almost saw it as kind of hyper corporatism and kind of a hostile takeover.
Yeah, I don't think it's ever explicitly stated. They refer to it as the agency a few times, and of course, when you think of the agency, you think of like the CIA, So
Yeah,
it's like,
but it's also,
right, but it's never explicitly stated, and it's like its status as a corporate or government or extension of both things is like I love that we don't get any information about that, and we don't see much of the agency either. We don't see like all of these like body snatching assassins. We only ever see our one and her handler, Jennifer Jason Leigh, and like the doctors that put her, into the machine.
Yeah, and I think going back to what Cleveland was saying about how this movie isn't the deepest, especially compared to something like Inception, I agree, and I almost think that if there's any minor shortcoming about this movie is I feel like they could have done a little more with the premise in that, I think if Elder Cronenberg was doing the same movie, he would have kind of delved a little deeper into the psychology and the philosophy of what is going on, where I think this movie covers a lot of that excellently. I think there's a little more to be mined from it.
For me, I love exposition in sci-fi. I love like having a moment where the character explains to us, or organically it's shown to us, like how something works or how the world operates. But also, it's so done and it's so seen that just having a film take itself for granted and just push through to the plot and like really keep the focus on the events themselves was really satisfying. Was a fresh breath of air. And to get too deep into how the machine works or whatever else, which again I do love. Generally, in this context, I really appreciated that we didn't get that. I was very happy to just have it be taken for granted for what it was, and for us to just say it works through science things. And
when I'm saying that, I'm not talking about exposition or explaining things. I'm talking about the ideas and the philosophy of possessing and kind of going into the central themes a little further.
Oh, okay. So you wanted the boat scene in Ghost in the Shell where the major and the other guy just sit on a boat and talk about like deep philosophy for about 5 to 10 minutes?
Not even necessarily. I think the one of the biggest things of David Cronenberg stuff is he has such a knack for, exploring these media philosophy themes, especially in things like Videodrome, Existence as well to an extent, with a sort of directness without being too in your face. And I think the exploration of that stuff is a little deeper than we get here. And I don't think that's too much of a problem overall in this movie. I think this movie is still fucking excellent. But I think as Brandon Cronenberg makes more movies, I think we'll see kind of a growth there. I think that's kind of an avenue that he still has to develop a little. And I think it's mirrored with David Cronenberg as well. Mm-hmm. A lot of Cronenberg's early stuff is leaning on either side of that spectrum, where it's too philosophically deep, where it loses the plot, or it's not quite enough. Whereas later in his career, he kind of melds the two perfectly.
Yeah, I mean, I think Brandon obviously has the luxury of like learning from his father and that tutelage and that experience. But I would say, like, if you compare where Brandon is in his career to where David was at the same point in his career, I think Brandon has the potential to like possibly outshine his father if he keeps on the path that he's going. I think he's got a knack for it way earlier on.
When it comes to the philosophy in this film, or philosophical dialogue, or just the dialogue in general, yeah, we only really get the monologue at the end about like the like toxoplasmosis, sort of like metaphor of a brain parasite. And before that, really any opportunity there would be for like world building dialogue to say like, oh, your consciousnesses are melding together because of X thing, and what this could mean for you, like going forward, like any of those opportunities are sort of shut down because Voss is so stubborn, is so like said as, nope, I'm fine, let's keep moving forward, when she's not. You know,
Right.
like is sort of like in a state of like denial. I love that. Any chance there would be to have that is shut down by her. And it keeps so much of the conversation about identity left to visual metaphor. And the visual metaphor is so strong in this that it stands on its own two legs. And that's what I love is it's not needed because
Yeah.
like the visuals, the abstraction tells us everything we need. And there's no fat in the dialogue. And there's just the one bit at the end that actually digs into the philosophy of it, allowing us to talk about the philosophy here outside of the film. It allows us and it gives us that opportunity and it doesn't hold our hand through it. And fuck if I don't love that.
In that same vein, I agree with you. I want to go back because I didn't really chip in when y'all were talking about like the depth of this film as compared to Inception. I can't believe we keep talking about Inception.
Yeah.
I think Inception is fun, but whatever.
I agree about that.
While I agree with you that like, yeah, this film isn't necessarily deeper, it is because of its simplicity that it succeeds in its visual abstraction. There's more to be gleaned from the sequences that we get because in terms of premise, it's very simple. It's straightforward and it leaves a lot that you can take from it from the sequences. Whereas Inception tries to be deep by becoming more and more convoluted. Like the idea of having to go within a dream, within a dream, within a dream, and all of these things happening. It's like a magician, you know, it's
sleight of hand. It's needless complexity.
Yeah, it's sleight of hand. It's pulling off the trick. I mean, to compare it to another Christopher Nolan film, The Prestige is and I mean that as in terms of the actual term of like the reveal of a magic trick. It is accomplished because of the sleight of hand distraction of everything else. Where this movie doesn't need that. It's not trying to obfuscate. You're just kind of along for the ride and watching as Voss gradually loses control of her consciousness. Okay, so we've talked at length about like some of the larger ideas at play. Should we start getting more specific? Sequences you guys enjoyed?
Well,
Throwing
let's
out?
start with the very first scene
yeah.
we see where the black lady is in front of the mirror and she has to, you know, stick the device into her head.
As we learn later, it's the calibration device.
Yeah, it looks like a meat thermometer, like
because
we said
Voss
before.
is possessing her. But yeah, to start the movie, just seeing this young woman standing in front of a mirror and inserting
Kind
a
of
long,
trepanating herself.
a long
essentially.
needle into the back of her skull and like turning a dial on a device and sort of like fluctuating through a series of emotions, like laughing
Intense
and crying.
emotions. Too.
Yeah.
It's very, very unsettling.
Yeah, and also, like, we haven't talked... I mentioned that the film is very gory and brutal, but, like, even from that first little bit, like, we get, like, an extreme close-up of, like, the needle going into her head. I feel like it so perfectly sets the tone for the rest of the movie, because it's, like... If you're gonna get squeamish at that little bit, then you're gonna have a bad time with the rest of the movie.
Yeah, it's a good primer for the rest of the movie, to say the least. And from there, you know, we have that sequence where she's going up to the party where she's supposed to be waitressing at with all these other waitresses. And I love the costume design of the, you know, like we said before, the bright blue, you know, almost Heaven's Gate looking jumpsuits.
The Heaven's Gate tracksuits.
I think it was like the scene where she first walks into the room. I think like I just straight up said, I already love the color in this film. Like already love the color. We're in for a good time.
Super saturated, just super vibrant blue.
Yeah, I love how that sequence too foreshadows or sets up so many other things that we see more of in the movie, like the distortions of reality that Voss experiences. We get the first one in that scene where she's looking at the fountain and the water is going backwards into it while everything else is seemingly normal and we don't know what's going on yet. It's like, what the fuck is happening here? And we see more of that later when she's in Colin's body with like the little specks of white,
little white nugget,
little white dust motes or whatever that appear that she'll grab, and then they're not there. That's set up wonderfully. As we kind of mentioned, the inability to pull the trigger and kill herself after the assassination is set up there. And also just kind of like Voss obviously takes some kind of like, she kind of gets off on the violence too. We see in that scene the fact that she doesn't just shoot the guy like she's supposed to, and Jennifer Jason Leigh remarks on that later. Instead, she takes a knife and stabs him like 40 times, just like over and over and over and over again, like really cathartic, brutal violence.
Well, she essentially turns his face almost into a mask. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. Because she does it again later with Sean Bean.
To Sean Bean,
and
instead of
with
just
the fire poker,
instead of just shooting him like she's supposed to, she beats the shit out of him with the fire poker and breaks his teeth with it.
Well, yeah, because like
his eye out.
He's on the ground, and she just starts kind of digging into his face with it, and like up under and through the mouth, like, and it just it creates this, like just pulps everything under the skin.
Really gnarly too.
Yeah.
It's just stomach churning.
Absolutely brutal.
And it plays into that same deep sort of psychological, like almost tribal horror that we all experience when we see clown faces, because like follow me on this journey real quick.
I'll go with you.
One of the things that can psychologically like freak you out about a clown face is like the red around the eyes and mouth, because that in some circumstances came from like enemy warriors wearing their prey's faces. And that idea of like the mouth around the mouth and like the eye holes around the eyes is just can really hit you on like a deep psychological, like,
it's
primal
Warpaint,
level,
like the Joker.
And I mean that is of course why the Joker is so terrifying, oh man, and deep, and equally deep to this film, of course. But no, honestly though, that idea of masks and like wearing your prey is
that's also brought back in later when Voss starts losing control of the consciousness to Colin, and you get that amazing sequence where in very Cronenbergian fashion, you see their faces kind of ripping apart from each other and just gnarly skin separating between the two. And then even later, you get the mask.
That was probably my favorite sequence in the film, where the deep cover guy Eddie shows up to like help try to let Voss retake control of Colin's body so she can kill herself, so they can pull her out. And we get that scene of like literally Voss and Colin struggling like in the same mind, and he like pops her head like a balloon and then wears the skin like a mask, and we see him going back through previous events that we've seen in the movie, but it's him wearing her mask instead of her, and oh my god, it's really creepy.
To trivialize it, essentially Colin is saying the classic, "I'm not in here with you, you're in here with me."
Well, the mask is really disturbing. It's not like a crazy detailed mask it's detailed enough, but you know what it reminded me of? It reminded me of Michael Myers
or Leatherface.
Yeah, or Leatherface. Yeah, I think both of those are apt comparisons.
In being able to see glimpses of what's underneath is what makes it so creepy. You can see his mouth kind of inside of the mouth of the mask, and it just makes it all the more unsettling and tactile.
I can imagine like an Inception dude bro going like, "What's going on right now? Are they wearing the mask? What is this?"
Well, yeah, it's a reversal because she's wearing his face like a mask, and then he's wearing her like a mask, man.
Wow.
Yeah, it's one of those things when you talk about it. It is kind of like stoner bro. Like, whoa, man, it's crazy how that kind of shit can happen.
Are we all just wearing masks?
Are we all
man?
just wearing masks? But the execution is so skillful and so like artfully done that it is it's very unsettling.
One element that I think brings out the skillful qualities is, once again, how little detail we are given as to how this process works.
Yeah.
Because, you know, she says like pull me out before like attempting to kill like her host that she's inhabiting. But we don't know like when, like between like how slow that process is. We don't know how fast it is, how effective, like how much gets pulled out. We don't know what the time frame is, if they're too slow or too fast. What'll happen. Like we know that like it can be fucked up. We know that.
Yeah, well, and they mention before she goes into Colin that, you know, if she stays in the body too long, she will lose herself.
Yeah,
like longer than like 3 days.
And
I
we
think.
get that excellent sequence where they're trying to pull her out and then she just starts bleeding from the mouth in real life.
Yeah, in the machine.
Yeah.
And leading up to that, like what's cool is because we don't know how sensitive the removal process is, it leaves us just on the edge of our seat wondering, right? Like and sort of like just terrified of that. Like so when she starts bleeding from the mouth and everything else, like it's so much more of a surprise or a shock.
I got the impression, and once again, this isn't explicitly stated, so this was just the way I read it. I got the impression that they could actually pull her out fairly easily, but the trick is that they had to do it at the moment that she pulls the trigger, because if they pull her out before the host is dead, then the host has full control of the body and there's no way for them to get that back. So it's time sensitive in that it has to be like synchronized. Like so much of this process is about synchronization. You know, the calibration device is about resynchronizing her brain with her consciousness with the host's brain. It's like, it's all very delicate, and we see how horribly wrong it can go when that time sensitive stuff is not handled properly. Also, it's exacerbated by the fact that when she first fails to kill herself as Colin and he takes control because of the survival instincts, he immediately picks up a shard of glass and starts digging around in the hole in the back of his skull to try to
forget about that?
To try to get the device out. So he damages the device in the process, which just makes everything like so much more dramatic.
Oh yeah.
And horrible.
Oh yeah. Well, why don't we talk about the I think the most effective metaphor in this film, and that's the butterfly, because it's used, I think, so well in the ending of this movie. Like I love the way this film ends, and I know we have many other sequences to cover, but it's so fitting to this topic. After her first mission that we see, she's sort of reacclimating to her actual body and her mind again. And she's given
kind of like a debriefing process with Jennifer Jason Leigh.
Yeah, to make sure that all the cogs are still clicking. And so she pulls out various objects from a box and has to name what they are and the significance they are to herself,
and whether they belong to her or not.
Yeah, and it's cool because it's sort of like the reverse of like a Void Conf test from Blade Runner. You know, it's sort of like a test to make sure that you are yourself again and that you're back there.
Well, and it's testing that through, once again, the concept of possession. She's going through a list of items and determining which one of those are hers. Which one of those does she possess? And that's the trick, is she able to remember what is hers and what is not? To be able to tell if she is back to herself and how much of the host's consciousness lingers with her.
And so what I thought was going to happen in this film during that scene is I thought we were being set up for one of her hosts to come back with her. and we would have
that
a
would be
sequence,
cool,
right?
actually.
Like, and that's the direction I thought they were going in, where we'd have a sequence where we're sitting down with her, with the other person in, inside, once again, that I'm not in here with you, you're in here with me situation. And that would be some sort of a tell, or there'd be tension around them trying to lie through it. But we don't get that, and that's fine. I really like how the film ends instead. But the second object that she picks up, or she pulls from the box, is a sort of a shadow box of a pinned butterfly. Mm-hmm. And she tells us that it was a butterfly that she killed when she was a child and felt bad about. And so then she decided to pin it and press it. And
It's almost like she's the butterfly, man.
well, the way I see it, and I think the intent is, and also get out of here. I'm
right.
The intent there is like the butterfly is her prey. Like it's the Colin. Like Colin is the butterfly in the story, and she's killing Colin. She's preying on Colin, but she begins to feel remorse, and that we don't know whether it is the host coming back that is preventing her from killing the host, or if it is her feeling sympathy for the host, and that's why she's sort of allowing them to come back a little bit, and that's what the problem is. And that's left open to our interpretation.
Oh, see, that's interesting, because I read that whole thing entirely differently.
Same.
I don't read Colin or the butterfly as her prey. I think the butterfly is her. She is pinned by Jennifer Jason Leigh. She is kept by her as sort of as a prize, as a point of pride, and that the reason she loses control is not because she has remorse for any of these people. In fact, I find her throughout pretty remorseless entirely. I think that she has become so adept at being a hunter that she has lost the capacity for remorse. She is only a predator, and it ends up being her undoing because she gets so lost in it that she loses control, because she loses herself in the hunt, in the possession of the body, and that's why she is ultimately kind of defeated by Colin, because she is not able to maintain that level of control. And it's not from remorse, it's because she gets lost in the sauce, as Gucci Mane would.
That's so interesting, because I read it as kind of a synthesis of both of yours.
Yes.
So, I think the key in the butterfly is the second time she's asked at the very end of the movie, she doesn't mention her guilt or remorse at all. I see that omission as kind of her complete loss of humanity.
So it took that process.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Through
because it was a
in the
weakness to
beginning
her.
of the movie, you see her struggling to end the host's life, and I think bringing in the family, that she had left and is now coming back to as kind of her last grasps of humanity and trying to have a sense of self and a sense of humanism.
Because she feels like she should, but she doesn't actually feel it.
Well, I would argue that she has inklings of that feeling.
Yeah.
But Jennifer Jason Leigh doesn't want that, because she knows that humanity is what makes her weak and susceptible to, the host taking control back.
Which is largely why she tries to manipulate her away from her ex-husband and child.
Well, even further in the movie, I think that's the reason she lets some of the things that happen, and the reason that ultimately her whole family is destroyed in the end.
Yeah.
Colin takes control again and goes to the house and, ends up killing her ex-husband. And in the struggle, her son is killed too, because Jennifer Jason Leigh takes his body to kind of finally pull her out. And I think that was done very, very purposely on Jennifer Jason Leigh's part.
Oh, for sure. I mean, absolutely. Like, Jennifer Jason Leigh's character is extremely calculated in ensuring that she keeps Voss for her own use. And very obviously she's trying to drive her away from her family. And I think by the end, she has succeeded even before the family is killed, because when Voss is trying to regain control of Colin's body in that sequence, and we kind of have the two of them standing there in the room together, and like he's got the gun to her ex-husband's head, and he's like, I swear to God, I will kill him. She says, do it. Like, she doesn't have tenderness for her family at this point anymore. Like, she has fully given herself over to that predatory instinct. Like, we even see the beginnings of that earlier, like when she tries to go back to her family and she's not really happy with them, to the extent that like she goes downstairs in the middle of the night to call Jennifer Jason Leigh and be like, yeah, I know I said I needed time off, but I'm actually ready to come back to work. Like, call me in whenever. Yeah. Like, at that point, she is fully willing to abandon her family, and anything that is left of that is just her knowing that she should still love her family.
See, I saw that as her seeing that as a weakness in herself and realizing that her family still had that effect on her, and was like her trying to escape from that and like escape back into her work.
I mean, I think the two are kind of the same.
And
like
I think the beauty in it is that
family.
You can interpret it either way, because that allows the viewer to act in a similar way of like a loss of identity, right? Like we are so sure about like our protagonist's motives. We sort of hijack Voss the same way that Voss hijacks other people, right? Like because we're sort of given this blank slate with a degree of texture, we're allowed to impose our own motives onto Voss the same way that she imposes her motives onto other people, and it allows the viewer themselves to be a possessor, which is really cool. It's fucking awesome stuff.
See, I think I read the ending slightly differently. I see it as extremely bleak, first off.
No doubt.
Obviously,
I don't think anybody's arguing that.
Not just because, you're killing a kid, which is inherently loaded and edgy in itself, but also I see the family as kind of a symbol of her humanity as a whole. And I think her being accepting of killing her family is not her not having it to begin with. I think she realizes that it's hopeless and there's no way the agency is going to let her have any humanity. So she just accepts it, and I think that's even more bleak, because I think it really plays full circle into the idea of her not being an individual, but just a possession of the agency as a whole, to be used as a tool.
The butterfly itself does act as a tool to show us that this character at some point does feel empathy. Whether it was just when they were a child, they don't feel it anymore.
Oh, yeah.
But they're capable of like some amount of, they're not pure sociopaths.
I think, well, no. And I would not suggest that. I think that if anything, what the film shows us is that when we are introduced to this character at this stage in her life, she is trying to hold on to the last little vestiges of empathy that she is capable of, but doesn't really feel it and allows herself to lose it by the end. Mm-hmm. I think that
and ignoring like the signs of damage or ignoring like her signs of failure are a means of denial. Yeah, I think it's.
I mean, she obviously had a family. Like, she had a husband and a son, and like her husband says, at that scene at the beginning, like, I want you to move back in. Like, I'm tired of this. Like, I want things to be the way they were. So it's like, obviously, she did have a happy life before. I just think that by the time we're introduced to her, she has almost lost it. And the movie,
it's mostly gone. Yeah,
it's almost entirely gone, and the events of this movie are what make her lose that last little bit of it.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the whole crux of
the machinations of Jennifer
the
Jason
actions
Leigh
of this movie are showing the resiliency of the last little bit of humanity that she does have. That comes out in the hesitancy and difficulty she has in killing her host. That comes out with her revisiting the family. It's that last little vestige of
Yeah,
individual.
she's trying.
Right, like
the
well, and it's-
self.
Yeah, like that concern for the butterfly again, and that is exactly my thought on that. Like because we are told multiple times that she's like the best. She's the best in the field. So if she
You're my
was
best agent.
right, like so thank you. If she is right, and she has lost all of her humanity, then there shouldn't be any reason for that person to take over anymore, right? There shouldn't be any means. But if they still can, it has to be because of a character weakness, right? I see that as like the only way that the host could still could still be allowed to not pull the trigger, right? Because if she is so good at her job, like we're told, then it shouldn't be a problem. But the fact that it is says something. Right. And I think it says that.
And
it
I
says that
think-
she feels bad for the butterfly.
Yeah, and I think on the flip side, the fact that we keep seeing her kill in more and more deranged, heartless ways shows that humanity leaving her. The fact that she doesn't simply shoot them.
Yeah.
That's shooting them would be the merciful thing.
Of course, the cleanest.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Sean Bean, like, she's pinning that butterfly.
Right, but she does it. She does the same thing in the opening sequence.
Yes.
That brutality, that desire to not just kill but to brutalize is already very strong in her.
It's
That's why I'm saying,
ritualistic.
like, she's lost almost all of it already.
I see it almost as like a ritualistic act of proving, which again, like, filters back into her denial as well, right? Is like, it is her trying to show herself that it is gone, right? Like, she's repeatedly stabbing these people. She's like, and mutilating them, like, and killing them in just the worst ways possible instead of just a clean gunshot.
Right.
Because she is trying to show that to herself, and she's having to, and she's going out of her way to show that to herself because there is doubt. Does that make sense? And then so it's an act of her trying to prove that to herself, and she keeps trying to prove it to herself, and that's why she's having denial over it, right? It's like, should we pull you out? What's going on? Why are you laying on the floor of this bathroom as your host? What's happening here? I'm fine. Everything's fine. Let's go forward with the mission. It's denial. Right.
Well, there's a lot of denial, but for me that reads as denial via hubris, because she has been told that she is the best, because she has this high track record of success and that she is such a valuable asset that any sign of weakness, as in her losing control, would not only force her to admit it to her employers but also to herself that she is not the best. I think in those instances where she like brutally murders these people, it's less about her trying to prove something to herself and just yet another instance of her losing control. Because that's what she does the entire movie, and what ends up with her and Colin struggling to maintain control of this body. It's because even though she's the best at this, she cannot maintain control. She has lost something that allows her to control, either from doing this too many times, whatever, psychological damage, whatever it might be, all of the above. She is not in control. And her rages where she massacres people are that, but on a larger scale. She is giving herself over to the rage and the bloodlust. She is allowing herself to become the beast. And then after that, she's not able to finish it because she's so caught up in that moment that she has let the control slip. So when she tries to pull the trigger and kill herself, the host takes over again because the survival instinct is stronger and she's not firmly in control. That's the way that I read it.
Wow, I love that read. I still feel the other way about it.
I don't think it's necessarily the right answer.
Well, no, and I think that's what's great is I think that they both have a great deal of validity. And how great is it that you can write a character with that sort of interpretation, right? Like, and that's not easy to do.
Yeah.
Like that's really challenging. And it goes back to the same thing I said about like Eraserhead and like so many other great films that utilize like the right amount of abstraction, right? Is they've given us enough texture to latch onto, but there are so many different ways that you can view it, that you can perceive it and interpret it. And how fucking great is that, man? Like real props to this film.
Good
real,
movie, good.
Good movie, good.
Well, to cap everything off, this was one of the main reasons I will never be getting a Neuralink.
Oh yeah.
I will never
honestly,
have a
Suck my dick,
computer.
Elon Musk.
I will never have a computer implanted in my head. No, thank you. Nope.
No, thank you.
You know, it's so funny. Like, if you had talked to me like 6 or so years ago and asked me how I would have felt about having my consciousness downloaded, I would have been like, yo, eternal life sounds rad. These days, yeah, not so much. That concept really fucking terrifies me.
Yeah.
It's the
like, no
utopian.
thanks.
It's the utopian ideal, man. It's like if it's not abused by evil people, then hey, it's cool.
Yeah,
but it's
guess
like,
what?
but in what reality would that be the case?
Yeah,
Not this one.
One of the end of the spectrum, you have like San Junipero, living out your dream world fantasy for eternity. On the other end of the spectrum, you have your body being taken over to do contract killings.
Small
Yeah, for corporations.
we wouldn't really have an opportunity to talk about it another time on this podcast, but small recommendation at this point: if you're into this sort of conversation, go check out Devs.
Oh yeah.
Go check out the show Devs because it's the
yeah.
best conversation, the best talking point about it, or anything. It isn't Alex Garland, is it?
It is Alex
Yeah,
Garland.
anything
Yeah,
Alex
sure.
Garland, Ex Machina, Devs, yeah, because it really gets into that in beautiful ways.
Yeah, Devs fucking rules. Definitely my favorite television show from this year, 2020. It's not explicitly horror, so yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because we'll probably never talk about it on the show. But Alex Garland fucking rules, and Devs was amazing. Yeah, definitely worth checking out. Anything else on this one, boys, or is it time to rate? I mean,
Let me think because there's so many great moments.
I think there's more to unpack, but it's one of those things where it's like I would almost just encourage people to go experience it themselves. Like we've hit all the big ones. I think that in many ways we've just hit the tip of the iceberg.
Sound design equally minimal to the world building.
I will say-
like the tension is just like really leaves you out in the open. Like I
One of the very minor complaints that I had is sound mixing a little bit. I think there were a couple times where the dialogue was a bit hard to make out. And we were even playing it loud. It was just a couple moments in particular, but it did stand out because this movie is very, very good. So it gets down to the nitpicky points.
Yeah, some of those, I think I know some of the instances you were talking about, and I had a hard time telling if they were badly mixed or if they were purposely obfuscated, because I feel like a lot of those instances came at moments where Voss was kind of like zoning out, was experiencing some like disorientation, sort of like giving into the ringing in her ears and shit like that.
I think so.
So it's like there were times where I'm like, I can't tell what that person is saying, but I never felt like I was missing important dialogue because of it.
Yeah.
It felt more ambient to me. So I don't know. It's hard to say. I think that this film is overall very meticulous.
Yes.
It has a high attention to detail.
And I think a lot of the richest elements of it come out in the small details. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Ben, this was your pick, so why don't you rate it
Sure.
first?
Early on I said I wish they had gone in a little more with the philosophy, and after we talked about it a little bit more and we kind of delved into some of the themes and ideas presented, I think it's a lot more rich than I was initially giving it credit for. I think this movie is easily one of the best of the year. I was going into this firmly believing I was going to give it a 4.5, but after talking about it, this has got to be a 5. This is just a fantastic movie. It's easily one of the best of the year, and I think it's essential viewing.
I can ditto that pretty much exactly. I was also planning on giving it a 4.5 when we started, but there is so much more, to it than I originally anticipated, and such a sort of diverse number of readings for things in this film. So yeah, I definitely have gained a greater appreciation of it through our conversation, and I'm gonna give it a 5 out of 5 as well. Actually,
It's an easy 5 from me. It's not too often that I can be sitting in a film and feel so uncomfortable and just not want it to end and just want to still be there because I'm just so drawn into the world and the events as they're occurring. It's rare for me that like I can just really want to dig into that film and just live in that really shitty time.
Yeah, it's a bad time in the best way. Like this,
Yes.
It's a very dark, bleak, depressing, nihilistic film in a lot of ways. Like I would not recommend going into this like if you're in a particularly bad headspace. Like there's not good times to be found here.
I'm often quick to shut out nihilism. I can get a little tired of it. I hold very strong disdain towards apathy often, like just as a personal trait. And this film, like, it utilizes those themes and those feelings so well that it just makes me want to immerse myself in it. And, it really had me turning.
Well,
great movie. More like it. I want to see more movies like this.
I know I mentioned San Junipero earlier, but like, I think the comparison to Black Mirror is interesting because I think this movie does dystopia way more realistically than most of Black Mirror does.
I feel like this movie is what Black Mirror has been trying to be for like the last 5 or 6 years,
and occasionally does. It occasionally gets close.
You get glimpses of it. In Black Mirror.
Never like as masterful as what this film did. But like there are times where like Black Mirror does a pretty great job. Other times. Oh boy, definitely not. But
we're not here to talk about Black Mirror.
No, thankfully.
Well, if your toaster was a white nationalist in it, that'd be pretty fucked up, huh? Yeah, well, okay. This is Possessor is a unanimous 5 out of 5 from the boys. A golden pod, to be sure. Is this our first unanimous 5 out of 5 for 2020 films? The only other film that I've given a 5 out of 5 this year is The Lodge, and I can't remember if all of us did or not. Okay.
This is the only 2020 movie.
This is our only
5 out of 5.
perfect score.
Yeah, I gave a 5 to Invisible Man, but
I also gave a 5 to Invisible Man.
I did not.
Yeah,
okay.
Tease did not.
I did not. So yeah, this is our first unanimous. Wow, awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Well,
And
I mean,
deservedly.
if that's not a fucking re-endorsement, go check it out. We did see the uncut version.
Yeah.
I have heard that is the preferred version.
I think it's the
there's-
main version you're gonna find on VOD.
I think
too.
there's a couple of different versions floating around. Obviously, we don't know how it differs. There are a couple of scenes, particularly that I can think of, were probably cut.
in a COVID-19 world. It's weird because the original cut version isn't like getting a theatrical release of any.
It was probably
designed.
it probably originally was going to, though.
Yeah, of course. But now, the uncut version is probably the version you're gonna find online anyways. So.
Anyway, well, I would recommend it, but not for the squeamish or faint of heart. So yeah, go check out Possessor. Next week, it's my pick.
Yep.
Yeah. I'm keeping the 2020 train rolling. There's a few 2020 films I wanted to get caught up on. They've been my last few picks. Going at it again. This time, I'm choosing the new 2020 Russian horror film, Sputnik. I've heard some decent things from folks. I've heard in many ways that it's just an Alien rehash, but I'm
great to me.
expecting, I'm
Hey,
expecting
I
it
love
to
Alien.
be fun.
Alien rehashes have been done well this year.
This is true.
Underwater
And
is
also
a great
not well.
example.
See,
Yeah, I'm choosing to hope
some
that
of the
this'll
movies
be-
that we've talked about.
I'm choosing to hope that this will be another underwater. We'll see. It's a Shudder original. So we'll be back next week with our thoughts on Sputnik.
But before we go,
Yeah, Cleveland, who's our sponsor for this week?
here I'll hand it over to the person that the studio hired to what studio that is. You'll just have to wait to find out. Hired to do the read.
Oh yeah.
Hi, my name is Egbert Milligan, and I don't know about you, but I'm tired of my consciousness inhabiting this meat suit and puppeting it around day to day. So instead, of doing that, why don't you hand over your consciousness to Blueby and Frankbert. Their company, Meat Suit Incorporated, has developed a brand new technology that I'm too tired to name, that will puppet your body for you. And yep, that's it. You get the joke. I'm tired.
It's like that Gerard Butler movie, Gamer. Thanks, Egbert. Now get out of my house.
Sure thing.
All right, that'll bring us to the end of this week's episode. If you like the show, head on over to Apple Podcasts, hit those 5 stars, leave us a nice review, share an episode with your friends or your family. You can follow us on Twitter at PodPeoplePod or at letterboxd.com/podpeoplepod, where you'll find a list of all the films we've talked about on the show with our average ratings and links to those episodes. And you can also see the list of all of our unanimous perfect score golden pods, of which Possessor is just the latest entry, but something tells me it won't be the last. You can follow me on Twitter at SomeSpookySnake.
I'm on Twitter at Mr. Sheets.
And this is Cleveland Mosier speaking. I need to remind you that it's actually me because my impressions are so good and on point.
Where did Egbert go?
I don't know. Maybe he was never here.
Oh my God.
Anyway, you can find me vicariously on Twitter via Lightarc Studio as we continue to put out progress on our awesome spooky game, It Stares Back. We've got our next chapter update, Tower Call, coming out soon. You can also see my work on ArtStation if you search Cleveland Mosier. Stay tuned. I've got tons of cool art stuff and projects in the pipeline.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us. I'm going to go plug a needle into my brain and
Speaking of plugs,
and recalibrate this fucking failing brain of mine. All right. Bye.